Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this session about how to organize the digital dimension of eHUBS. We will try to cover today exactly what is what are the data standards available, how to use them, and why to use them. So I will not keep the suspense ongoing, and I will call our first speaker today, Tjalle Groen. Welcome on stage. Tjalle is a project director at Impact, and he will tell us about TAMP MPI and what we did with TAMP MPI in eHUBS, right?
Yes, I will.
Thank you, Tjalle. The floor is yours.
Thank you for your introduction. Good morning, everybody. I will speak like this, see what happens. Okay, thank you for coming to this second day of the eHUBS conference on the Hub conference. I want to take you away in a little bit of a journey that we took within the eHUBS project when it comes to data standardization. And then I will go into what the standard is we chose for and why we did it. So that's in short what we're going to do. But first, I want to start with Impact. So I work for Impact, and Impact is an organization. Earlier we were known as TaxiStop. We changed our name last year, and we are a non-profit, been around since 1975 with the motto of doing more with less. This comes to sharing. It started out with things like carpooling when it didn't even exist, or ride sharing in the 80s in a completely non-digital way. But it has evolved into more different things. We also have services like Cozy Wheels, which is car sharing between your neighbors. So instead of an organized car sharing fleet, we enable neighbors to very locally share their car with others, or other vehicles like cargo bikes or electric bikes. Another thing that we do is MobiTwin, and MobiTwin is it's a service where we work together with local communities to enable volunteers to drive elderly people who can walk less well to their doctor's appointment, to the hairdresser's appointment, to things like that, to enable them to travel around and to be active and engage in life. And next to that, we also have carpooling, as I said before. Now, with Impact, there are three main pillars we are working on to get more efficient in mobility. One is solutions, the things that I called about earlier. Second pillar is innovation, which is things we are doing like this data standardization, MAS, but also trying out new concepts, getting shared mobility out there in a better way. The third one is awareness. There's a big policy part in what we do, but we also organize events. Like a few weeks ago, there was Shared Mobility Rocks in Bremen in Germany, where we got a lot of municipalities together to talk about shared mobility and why it rocks. This is a bit what we do. So we want to enable more efficient mobility. It's important to create real solutions for real people, and we prefer to do everything we do through cooperation. Working together with organization is really important, and that will come back in the data story as well. eHUBS, yesterday there already was a lot of talk about the eHUBS project, so I'm going to take only a small part of it and let the others do most. It is important to know that, so this is the final conference of the normal project, but there is a capitalization call, which is something you can do in Interact projects, where you get extra time and funding to grow the reach of your project. That is why since the beginning of this year, we have, does the pointer work? No. We have Ireland, is part of our project. The region of Inverness and the Walloon region in Belgium is also part of the project now. And together with some other partners to really keep this project, because yesterday was a super interesting day with a lot of interesting thoughts and topics, and this enables us to go further with that. Yeah, this, I will skip this. In this project, one of the goals was digitalization, how to get data to users. Because if you want to increase the impact of a mobility hub, you need to inform the users of what is going on. And to inform users, you need data, and you need connected data, and you also need real-time data. That's why we built this kiosk application. You can see on the left how it looks like in the real world. So you have a big touchscreen somewhere in public space. And on this, we have a different overview of things like the real-time buses and trains when they're coming and going, an overview of if there is like a place to put your bicycle, if there's a charging station, information on bike sharing, on car sharing. It's all integrated into the system. And to do that, we needed a way to do this, because if you have to go to every single mobility operator yourself and have to integrate their full API stack the way they have designed it, it's an impossible task, especially when you're in a small project doing pilots, which was what we were doing in the beginning. This is now also in production in Flanders, so it's being used in real time. It's something from the project that has made it into the real world and is going to stay there. So that's why data? Why do you need data? Because it's difficult. Managing data is difficult, will always be difficult. And sometimes, like in lockdown, I put this picture in because I was doing puzzles like everybody else to kill my time when bored. And I was thinking, okay, but if you just turn everything around, because you've done it a few times, you make it harder, but it makes no sense to do it. That's why doing everything piece by piece, it's just something you don't want to do. And people know this. So this is a picture from the Mars Alliance. They've done research on which standards are available. If you look, and which standard parties are available. If you look closely, you will see things like mobility data, which is connected to Google and the GTFS standard, and GBFS. You have NetX, which is a large European body working mostly focused on public transport, but also offering a lot of different things and standardizing that. It's part of the regulation. You have the SAN network, which is the central standardization body of the European Union, which is also a big player in that. You have DataX, and a small part of that is the TOMP API. But the TOMP API is in a way unique, and that's why I want to talk about this. Because when you look at all these integrators and you take the 4 levels of MAS, which you have probably seen a million times before, there are these 4 levels, they say, that make MAS. And it's almost like a timeline in what will happen and what is needed. So the first thing, and that was the situation a few years back when there was no integration at all. You have just separate services which are connected in a way. Essentially, when you're doing NetX things, you're doing this. You're just saying, oh, this is what we have, get it, and do something. Then you have the integration of information where you're able to do multimodal route planning and actually do demands to users. That's where the MobiPoints and the kiosk application comes in. But on top of that, you have the full integration of booking, payment, support system, all these things. And that is what the TOMP API does. And up to now, it's one of the only, if not the only API that covers this whole spectrum of things. On top of that, you have the subscriptions, contracts, which is now also partly in the TOMP API in a way. And the top level is policy and incentives, how to incentivize users to go and use different mobility modes outside of the car through a MAS solution. So why would you do this? Just a roundup. You want to get your mobility data integrated fast. That's the main thing that everybody wants to do. And if you're offering data as a transport operator, you want it to be integrated fast. You don't want to get in a 2-3 month project together with other parties just to connect your service to them. It's also good for regulation. That will be in the CDSM story as well. And what for me is also important, because I come from a non-profit background, is that I want to create fair opportunities. Smaller players, which are really local, should also be able to integrate into a MAS solution. And that's why it's important to have a standardized way to do it, so they don't have to do their own research. They can step into it, they know what to do, hopefully get some funding somewhere to do it, and connect to the other players. But now to get deeper into the TOMP API. The TOMP API is a technical specification which covers the full journey of a user within a MAS interface or a MAS surrounding between the transport operator and the MAS provider. That's why it's called TOMP, T-O-M-P. The transport operator have to provide the data conforming this API structure, and the MaaS provider needs to be able to handle this protocol and handle the data to read it and to work with that. And also really important, the whole system, the whole working group is open source. So within the eHUBS project, I will go through this to make my story work. In 2019, the TOMP working group was founded. Within the eHUBS project, it also started just around this time. And I think the first or the second meeting we joined from the TOMP working group out together with Kangaroo, Kangaroo, who were also in the project. We started participating in the TOMP API working group and helped develop it over time. So instead of going for our own full solution within a European project, we decided to join forces with 7 MaaS pilots and do it together. Because it makes way more sense to cooperate, as I said in the beginning. Now I will go back. So this is the vision. I leave it in here because we will probably share the slides and the people at home can read it, and you can read it as well, but it's just the vision of what we want to do with the working group. And to visualize it, it's an image I borrowed from the city of Amsterdam. This is what it does. You have a user connected to mostly their mobile phone. They want to connect with different operators or mobility modes. And you use the TOMP API as a plug in between to connect everything. That's a nice overview of what happens. And how do we do this? I briefly touched upon this, but I want to dive a little bit deeper. So within the TOMP API structure, there are 6 modules. We start with on the left, we start with operator information. This is almost identical to GBFS. The TOMP API was modeled upon GBFS and will also keep up to date with GBFS. So there is an integration in all these different standards. What you can reuse, you should reuse. So this is who are you, what are you providing, where are you providing it, when are you providing it, how much does it cost, and how can people contact you. Is all figured in this thing. Next, and this is where it becomes interesting and becomes unique. You go into the planning phase. The planning phase, a user wants to go from A to B, and they don't really mind how they get there, they just want to get there. This question gets asked through the MaaS provider to the transport operator, and they will give certain assets they have available back, and the MaaS provider will combine this in an offering to the user. When this is successful, user says, oh, it's perfect, I can take, when you go fully multimodal, I will take a shared bike, we'll go on the tram, and then I will take a boat for a while, and then I get where I need to be. And says, perfect, want to do that, you go to in the booking phase, and in the booking phase, you finalize the booking, exchange details on payment, and how you want to do it, and just lock the asset. Trip execution is everything from opening the asset that can be through QR codes, Bluetooth connection, Wi-Fi connection. It's also starting the ride, pausing the ride, stopping the ride, anything in between that. Payment is, of course, the payment part, which is pretty loose in a way that everybody has their own way to exchange payment data. So it's not fully standardized, this part, because it's way too broad and too specific. And then next to that, you have the support part, which makes sense. You need to support. But if you're going, your bike breaks down, you need to be able to contact somebody who's actually working at the transport operator to fix this for you. As I said, in the eHUBS, as you remember, in the MaaS levels, we were at level 1. And that's one thing of the beauty of this modular system. You don't need to integrate everything all at once. To function within what we need for eHUBS to work and to function, we only need operator information and planning. Because we don't offer booking on this kiosk. It's about informing the user which choices they can make to make their travel better. So that's really interesting. Over time, you can gradually upgrade if you decide this is good for your company. Little overview, what is in the transport operator information. I talked about this, showed this as well. So where are we now? Beginning of this year, a new version was released. It's still long time supported, so it will stay supported over a longer time with the previous version, so it's where it is. The development is almost done in a way to what we want to achieve now. But there are still things we want to do and we want to keep going. Some new features in this last thing were on-demand solutions. So we brought it together with GOFS, which is on-demand mobility. linked to GTFS and GBFS through mobility data, worked on ancillary options to improve accessibility. How can you say, okay, a user is in a wheelchair and they need special access? That also needs to be communicated to the API, and that's now part of it as well. And we are starting to build in support for external user verification. There are some use cases with blockchain development. I don't know if this is the way to go forward, but it's a way to do user verification to help it go. So as I said, it's mature, it's ready to use. There are over 50 production versions, more than 100 working on implementation that we know of. In the Netherlands, in Belgium, in Australia, there is research being done in Florida. So there is a broad spectrum of people trying to look into this. But as I said, the market needs to catch up. So we cannot keep pushing new updates, new features, new things. It's a slow process of the market getting up to speed with this. That's why we are freeing up time to do different things and work on these things. I can pick some out, like Maas Islands, a lot of different Maas applications everywhere. If you travel to a different city, you need a different application. They can also be connected to the TOMP API. Things like that we are thinking about and working out on how to do it. Another thing is, trust is important, and certification is something we really want to do, but we're looking on ways to fund this to prove, okay, you've correctly implemented the TOMP API and you're good to go and safe to go. CDSM is coming up later. Just a quick overview of how it fits into what we're doing. So as a transit operator, you use the TOMP API to do it, and the information goes to a Maas provider. But the TOMP API is one of the ways, I must say one of the ways, but you will hear more about that, to also get information to the municipalities. So it's a combination. It's a very friendly standard which can be used together. But it's not exclusively used for this only. And if you look at where it fits, we have this triangle image where between the Maas providers and the shared mobility providers, you have the TOMP API to handle everything and to be able to offer multimodal trips. And CDSM is the part between the shared mobility providers and the government. The arrow should also be down. This is an old image, but it's a two-way system as well, which is very important in that. But you will hear more about that. My dream is Lego. Also, building toys is a bit of a recurring thing in COVID times. You connect everything, and it doesn't matter if you play with Lego before, you see there's some Duplo in there. You have all these different tech Lego or normal Lego, but everything connects to a central platform, and everybody can move the way they want, freely and in an open and nice way. If you want to know more, there are some links here you can look out for, and that was it for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do you, don't leave, I have still a little question for you. Do you agree with me if we say that now things are getting figured out with data standardization? It even sounds fun with Lego and puzzles, and no, it really sounds accessible actually. So do you agree with me if I say that now the mission is to catch up on these data standardization?
Yeah, I do agree with that. It's important that it's hard when you're of a heart. It's easy when you're in a field and you're working on this to accept or to think that everybody is where you are at. You're working on it, you're embedded in it, you're going for it, but in reality, the most of the world doesn't know what is going on. That's why it's really important to keep pushing this, keep talking about this, and if you're in a municipality or in a transport operator or you're connecting anybody, it's important to keep hitting the nail that standardization is important, if you're agreeing with me. If you don't agree, please don't. But yeah.
Okay, thank you. One last question then. I'll let you. What is, according to you, the main challenge between the situation as you explained it and the way to implement it in the real world, in reality?
I think the main challenge is to actually get people to implement it. This bridge between theory and reality to cross this. It's the main challenge in this, and to as a group working on this, not to want to run too fast and accept that things move slowly and that things move at their own pace, and you can't force it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chell.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening.
Okay, I will now call our next speaker, Gemma. Gemma and Alex. Yeah, so Gemma Schippers and Alex Pejikenics. Thank you for this one. So Gemma works for the city of Amsterdam. She's been working on CDSM for 2.5 years. So in the city of Amsterdam, she makes sure that the city and the mobility is safe and accessible to all. And then we have Alex. Alex, who is now very sorry, Alex, about this. I was not expecting you. Sorry, Alex is a recovering policymaker who worked in Pittsburgh and Seattle. He's now head of policy and partnership at Via Nova. And they will tell us about why data centralization is important and how actually it's used in the city of Amsterdam. Thank you.
I worked on the CDSM for almost 2.5 years, and I think it's good to tell that we started to design a new standard, which in the end we didn't do. So in the end, what we did is we made a framework and a toolbox. It's a way you make, it's a toolbox, which steps you need to make to come to a really nice data exchange, which actually protects citizens. It's a really complicated story sometimes, so what we want to do in this presentation, we want to change the presentation a little bit and to see actually what is the result of all the work that we do, and we hope that everyone understands that the thing that we did, the framework, the thinking behind it, leads to the results that Alex and I will present in the dashboard that we're going to show. And so I'm going to the next slide. We started with the CDSM 2.5 years ago, and it's backed up by the Utrecht subsidy, and we also joined forces into the Netherlands with the G5, the biggest city in the Netherlands. It's also being backed up by the ministry, so that gave us a huge body to develop the way of thinking. At this moment we're running 5 pilots in the Netherlands in this way of working, and it leads to one uniform way of data exchange with an API. And why actually it's very important to do all the framework. You want to exchange data in a safe way. You want to make sure your citizens are protected on a security level, on a privacy level. You don't want to collect a lot of data that you don't need as a city. So we only want to exchange the data that is necessary for the policy question that you need to answer. And we don't want to bother all the mobility providers to exchange data in different forms in different cities. So we want to make it easy for everyone. I think to go a little bit deeper on the privacy of people, why it's important to think about the privacy of people. If you see behind me this this example, if we collect a lot of data and we see, for example, which patterns people are using, in this pattern you see someone is using a lot of mobility in the place that he probably lives. It's what we think. And you see he's going to a hospital, you see he's going to like fast food restaurants, and you see he's going to an expert shop. So then you can, if you combine all those data, you can see, oh, but probably he's an expert, and you don't want as a city to know that he is an expert. It's not relevant, because as a city you want to answer your policy question, how do people move into cities, but you don't want to know who actually moves in the city. You want to make sure the roads are safe, the city will be accessible, and things like that. So that's why we put a lot of thinking behind this. And it ended up to a framework, and so you can exchange the data with an API. As Challa already said, there are different APIs in the market. So we collected all the use cases, pilots in Europe. We rate them, and with all the pilots that are existing, you can see, well, if you use this standard, you can guarantee you have the best protection of privacy. We present it in a few weeks. It's almost done. And if you follow the way we are working, you can guarantee that you protect your citizens, your data exchange is very safe, and you do it with an API. We also have all the contracts and agreements with the mobility parties already arranged. And I think it's very helpful to have data exchange with an API. So you can do a lot of analysis on the data, which give a lot of interesting results and also surprising results. The results that we are having now is the data is plotted in a dashboard. The dashboard is not hosted by the city of Amsterdam, not in any city of the Netherlands. We are not able to collect the data yet. So we working with ViaNova. Alex is from ViaNova, and we're working together to make sure that we will have the data with an API. And all data is guaranteed because we aggregate it at a certain level, so we can never track persons. We can never track the data to one person. And to make sure that we also went to all the formal authorities in the Netherlands to ask their input on how to design things like this. And I think the results, we can show the results based on the dashboard. In the dashboard, we plot all the eHUBs. This is the eHUBs conference. We plot the eHUBs in Amsterdam, and then you can do the analysis. For example, what is the free-floating a number of vehicles? What is the eHUBs? How are they being used? And then you can with the analysis, you can say, okay, maybe we do different parking zones. Then you can change the policy or the permits that you're giving to the mobility providers. And I think the main goal of all the thinking that we're doing is that we made a framework and a way of working to exchange the data to guarantee the safety of the citizens. I think that is the main message here. And I think, I think Alex, you can show the dashboard, and I think then we can also explain how it works for Amsterdam and also how it works for the Netherlands, and all the work what we did. And if anyone have any questions about the framework and the things we designed, please ask. It's a lot of things behind it, but we wanted to make it simple and easy and understandable for everyone.
Great. So when we think about data collection for hubs and sort of data collection more generally, we're really looking at 4 archetypes, and we recognize that there's a lot of different frameworks around sort of hub design and creation. But you think first about kind of hubs for the main use case of public order and making sure that you're kind of keeping the streets and sidewalks clear by concentrating devices away from sort of the major pedestrian pathways, for example, are different than, let's say, demand-generating hubs, right, in low-density areas where the purpose is to kind of aggregate the supply of services in the hopes that it kind of aggregates the demand as well. Obviously, another use case around mobility hubs is this sort of rider experience and the connection around intermodality. And then finally, hubs that are primarily designed to sort of show off a transition to decarbonized transportation and shared transit, where the goal is sort of the promotion and the visibility, not just the utilization. There's a lot of text there. You can download the document. It might be a little bit easier to review. But essentially, the key question that the city is asking really comes down to the origin and destination flows of devices in hubs compared to devices at large. The difference in travel patterns, let's say, between devices that are in hubs that are near to public transit versus devices that aren't. That kind of origin and destination pairing is the sort of key use case that we focused on in sort of the work that we had using the data that we were providing. Some of the sort of first things that are quite kind of relevant is understanding the relationship between the policy and the infrastructure in this case. So we began with shared mobility data from the 2 scooter operators, moped operators, Felix and Czech, as well as data from Kangaroo. Felix and Check operate through a permit in the city of Amsterdam that allows kind of free-floating distribution. And so what we found is the actual use of shared mobility in the hubs was not especially notable compared to the use overall. People aren't going to walk past 5 mopeds in order to get to the one in the hub unless it happens to be kind of the closest. Compare that to, for example, in Utrecht, where the overall policy around shared mobility is kind of a concentration of devices in stations, effectively, virtual stations, where you have the ability to, or you're required to return a device to existing parking location. That sort of creates the infrastructure, the ecosystem, where a hub might be more effective at sort of concentrating that demand. So it's quite important to think about the way in which that hub planning and the policy design, the regulatory structure, work in concentration. Obviously, a service like Cargaroo is a little bit different, where the purpose is round trip, and so in that case, you understand a little bit more about time of day, day of week trip patterns, but you're not necessarily going to get origin and destination because the origin is the destination in a A-to-A shared mobility option. The other piece here is kind of thinking about the elements of intermodality. So in Amsterdam, we haven't necessarily seen a large or a disproportionate use of mopeds immediately adjacent to public transport compared to sort of in markets where we work with shared bicycles and shared kick scooters. The trip distance for a moped tends to be quite long. The duration also 15 to 20 minutes in some cases in Amsterdam. In many cases, this is an indication that there's a substitution effect rather than a complementary effect. And it's sort of worth breaking into a little bit more. Again, damn it, small text. But one of the key questions that the city asked was around the origin and destination pairs overall. Especially thinking about Amsterdam in the context of a region, where many of the top origin and destination pairs in the city of Amsterdam, or including the city of Amsterdam, I should say, also include municipalities immediately adjacent, Amstelveen, Diemen, Haarlem, I guess not immediately adjacent, but in the vicinity. And it's quite important to kind of think about the way in which these regional policies affect the sort of overall flows of origin and destination. From a hub planning perspective, it also, I think, offers an opportunity for, let's say, trip interception at the periphery of the city, where you do potentially have the ability to turn a single moped trip into an intermodal trip involving public transport as well. We will see if... here we go. So what we found in sort of the CDSM experiment, there are certain questions that standardized data about mobility, shared mobility can answer. Typical usage patterns, times of day, days of week, the origin and destination pairs, and sort of the overall effectiveness, the ability to kind of compare these metrics in the context of a hub versus these metrics overall. But it's important to recognize that the standardized data isn't the be-all and end-all. There's been a lot of discussion yesterday around survey design, sort of qualitative assessments of substitution effect, right? Are these trips in a shared mobility replacing a privately owned car, replacing public transport, replacing walking? This is intentionally sort of not a question that CDSM is asking, and that standardized data is trying to collect, because it does ultimately, it is personally identifiable in the way in which it's collected, and it becomes important to have a sort of separate parallel process to answer those types of questions. It's also important to sort of recognize, and I think part of the experiment in the Netherlands around CDSM has been really understanding the differences in the quality of being able to answer use case questions, depending on the components of the data standard that are used. So not to get overly technical, but we use a combination of MDS, which is the mobility data specification, as well as GBFS, which is the generalized bike share feed specification. And part of the learning through our process is sort of finding answers to certain questions around origin and destination, let's say, are significantly easier with MDS endpoints than they are with GBFS. And it creates sort of an impetus for further consideration about how to match use cases specifically to the data standards that can answer them. And finally, it is a constant Herculean struggle to make sure that we improve data quality so that the reliability of the information that's being provided from operators and providers sort of matches the use case that's being asked. At the moment, the city's use cases are largely analytical, right? They want to understand usage patterns. They want to understand sort of flows. This is generally sort of something where a fair amount of risk or inaccuracy is to be expected. But as use cases evolve and as you start to think about compliance and sort of regulatory aspects of data collection, the precision becomes a lot more important and sort of the need for high quality data, higher quality data becomes even more important. I think that we will hopefully see a brief video to show some examples of the way in which we are examining origins and destinations here. So as Gemma mentioned, we've added the various hubs in place in the city of Amsterdam.
Everyone see
It will be available on video, so you can slow it down if you so choose. We've added the locations of these various hubs, understanding key performance indicators like the typical number of devices sitting in the hub, the availability or the utilization of those devices, but then also the trip flows, the typical trip locations, the origin, the destination from the various hubs. Again, I think one of the lessons is that from a shared mobility perspective, particularly mopeds, you're not seeing kind of dramatic usage differences than the city as a whole. In many parts, this is because there's only sort of one or two Felix scooters targeted in that location. This is an example of the way in which we sort of explore the origin and destination pairings of the mobility hubs. We compare kind of what districts and sub-districts trips are going to and from within that mobility hub. Again, I think part of the opportunity here is to be kind of precise and think about the way in which the policy changes, because in most cases, a trip is starting from a mobility hub and ending on the street, or vice versa, starting on the street and ending in a mobility hub, rather than a kind of pure hub-to-hub connection.
Yeah, what's interesting here is this is a hub, and around this hub, there's no free-floating parking zone, so everyone goes to that hub. But we have another neighborhood in Amsterdam, the Chassis neighborhood, and there you have different hubs and free-floating zone, and there you can really see if the hubs are really being used or if the parking is more free-floating on the street. So I think that is this kind of data gives really good insights on how hubs can be used by citizens and what you should do or how you can develop it later on.
The next phase for us is to kind of continue to add modes as well. So in addition to kind of ingesting data from cargo bike and moped to include car share data as well, so that the city can kind of continue to round out pictures of the sort of usage patterns of these mobility hubs, combining that with kind of other data collection around the qualitative aspects for sort of mode shift potential. That's all I got.
And I think also one of the very interesting discussions that we had last year, we had like 1 year about privacy. We discussed privacy for on CDSM for a year, and we agreed upon aggregation level of 15 in the postcode 4 zone. And you see with that aggregation, you can do a lot of analysis, but you cannot answer every policy question. You should maybe reconsider to have the aggregation level of 10 vehicles in your postcode level. And I think that learnings, I mean, this is really nice for policymakers to understand, but I think the thinking that we do behind all of this is that discussion about what is the aggregation level, how can you make the standard safe, which standard are follow the rules that we have in Europe. And I think in the future we will have more policy questions. We combine much more data. In Amsterdam we start a huge project where we are going to combine a lot of data, and then you get discussions about privacy. And I think you need to have a certain work group that thinks about that kind of questions, because policymakers usually just want to have the data and want to have their question be answered by data analysts. And I think, well, that is the really nice challenge we will face in the development of where we are now. And I think it gives an interesting data feature. We saw that we had like 3 rotations for scooters in the beginning of this year, and now there are around 7 rotations per day in scooters. We also see that the scooter use is being mainly in the city center, so the use of shared car, they go to the borders of the city. So you see a change of behavior from people if you have more shared mobility in the streets. We also saw something very funny. In Amsterdam, it's allowed to have 350 scooters per permit, and we saw that one scooter company put 420, I guess, scooters in the street, and the other did it, I think, 380 or 390. So they have more vehicles in the city than is allowed. And you can maybe think maybe we should have like a flexible permit on how many scooters can be in the city, because you can never guarantee like 770, 750 every day. Maybe you have you need to balance it a little bit. So I think that gives a little bit of insights. This is the result of all the steps you need to make before you get safe data exchange. And I hope this result will actually convince everyone to work with the method we developed. So I don't know if there's any questions.
So thank you very much, Rema and Alex, for this presentation. Thank you for highlighting the link between policies and infrastructure, and thank you for stressing that data standardization can really have an impact on efficient shared mobility. So indeed, is there a question? Yeah.
What are ways to improve the data quality? What are the ways to improve the data quality of the operators?
Alex, is for you.
Yeah, I think first and foremost is sort of the city being articulate about what data matters and why. So in many cities that we work with, the city articulates kind of in the tender conditions or in the license conditions sort of what is required in terms of a service level agreement of, the availability of the feed, the ability to kind of audit the feed as well, so that there's sort of a record of the quality. And gradually it's sort of operators understanding that there's an alignment between their business interest and providing data to the municipalities. I think in the early days of kind of data standardization, it was sort of a side project for a lot of operators, and gradually operators recognize that in order to get a license to operate, they need to sort of improve the data quality to match. So I would say making sure that the city sort of understands and is able to be articulate in what it's asking for. We can echo it, but ultimately having the hammer, the regulatory hammer, is really the resource that helps cities or that helps operators kind of see the light of high quality data.
And I think also it takes for a mobility operator, I think, 2 sprints to implement the API, but then you need to have a few more months to make sure the data quality and the exchange of data is improving. So it also takes a little bit time for the mobility operator to implement the API, but then when you're there, you're done.
Since there are several questions, I will take this as an opportunity to open the general Q&A, and I will call Charles to join the panel.
Sorry. Hi. So the data is currently being used for analytical purposes. Mm-hmm. I can imagine that if the quality rises, that you can also use it for predictive purposes. Yeah. Because then, for policy making, I assume that you need predictive purposes. So you're not there yet. Is that correct?
Yes, we are starting a project to predict the where you can position hubs the best. So we're starting the project, ViaNova, is designing a simulation tool, and you can then put all kinds of policy question in your simulation tool, so you can predict the usage of shared mobility, or where you can locate them the best. Yes.
One of the tensions, I think, is again, I've been on the policy side, and it's sort of if everything is a priority, nothing is a priority, and so it becomes important to think about how you weigh these different objectives of the program as a whole. Often there's a lot of emphasis on let's say public space management, public order, right? I want to get fewer complaints, and that's my KPI. Whereas I think you are starting to see a few cities start to say, I want to make sure that this is reducing CO2, right? Contributing to my climate targets, or it's promoting accessibility in areas that otherwise don't have good public transport service, which doesn't really exist in the Netherlands, but bear with me. So I think that there is part of our challenge from a simulation standpoint is really getting policymakers to be articulate about not just how to minimize the bad things, but be maximization of the good things as well.
Yeah, and I think also we now have the exchange of data from the mobility provider to the city. We actually want to send data back from the city to the mobility provider. In Utrecht, they want to do the parking zones and maybe having flexible parking zones. So that is one of the next steps we want to take.
Thank you for the presentation. I have 2 questions, more technical. It's very interesting on the map when you present the trips. So in my past experience, when we had to analyze trips, what had a problem is that what we couldn't see with those trips is usually the trips not taken because there was no devices available.
Yep.
So how do you combine that? Do you have some kind of metric to actually to get that out, versus like availability, non-availability? And second is, what kind of spatial aggregation do you use? So, for example, I saw like mostly some kind of GeoJSON, I don't know, weird shapes.
Mm-hmm.
Do you use some kind of standardized grid or something? And would it be like better? Or what's the problem with that?
Yeah, getting under the hood. 2 things. To answer your first question, no. One of the biggest kind of challenges is, to your point, the kind of latent demand. And so something that some operators are sort of able to provide is essentially app opens. What is the kind of rate of opening because or failed trips from an open? It's not something that's sort of part of the standard now, but it's something that a number of operators have kind of expressed interest in finding a way to contribute, so that there's sort of an understanding of where devices should be, or a justification in some cases for more devices in order to meet that demand. Second question, we support sort of existing boundaries, right? We use districts and sub-districts of the municipality, as well as kind of the custom shapes, the boundaries of the mobility hubs, for example. And then we also sort of standardize data using the H3 kind of hexagon model for sort of comparisons between similarly sized hexes from one municipality to the next.
Yeah, I want to continue on the first question that was asked about the transport operator and how to improve the quality of data. And here I'm sitting next to Jeroen from Kangaroo, who's been involved in the project as well. So yeah, if you would like to share your experience on that, it would be really interesting, I guess.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Jet. I think it's a very interesting project, and that's why we participated. I think it took a bit of effort to get things going, both on the city side and also on our side. And I think there's still ongoing work, and we haven't achieved everything that we should achieve. A few remarks. There was in the beginning a lot of concerns about privacy, and I think we've been pretty able to solve that, which is a very good thing. What I would be interested, but that's more on a policy level, that's actually when do you see an effect of the shared mobility that you introduced in the city on the rest of the traffic in the city? So my question would be, do you also get insight in the non-shared mobility and all the cars running around, etc.? And then it would be very interesting to see what level of shared mobility do you need to see a recognizable effect on the city? Yes. Because actually the goal of the whole eHUBS project is to reduce the number of private cars. I think that's one of the main goals. I have to look at the city whether that's correct. But I would imagine that's one of the goals. And then it would be very interesting to see when do you start to see an effect. And as the number of hubs in Amsterdam is relatively small still, also interesting to have a prediction on how many hubs do you need to see any effect.
Yeah, I can answer the question. Well, we started the pilot with only a little bit of data, and we're now starting a new pilot in Amsterdam of all shared mobilities, and then we want to compare that with the model splits. So we're now going to add all the different data that we have on mobility in Amsterdam, like the cameras, like the sensors, road constructions, anything. So we setting up a data team that's going to analyze a lot of data for the next year. And I think if you ask that question within 6 or 7 months, we can really have the answer what the effect is. And I know besides that, the city of Amsterdam has the ambition to get more shared mobility in the city of Amsterdam. So you should have the effect in the end. And I think one of the little effects that has already been shown is that there's a higher use of shared mopeds in the city center, which makes that the shared car usage is more now in the border of the city and not anymore in the city center. So people not using the shared car in the city center, but using more, that's the assumption that we have from the data, using more the mopeds, and that the shared car is used more in the city center, and maybe they go have the trips from Amsterdam to Rotterdam or from Amsterdam to Utrecht. And that is also the questions that we have for the next year, to compare also the use of shared mobility in between cities. So ask me within 6-7 months.
I think one element that I want to add to that on the second part of the question is, to a certain extent, the data is not throwing up warning signs yet, which from my perspective is kind of keep going until you sort of run out. I think we've worked in cities where you wind up kind of having declining marginal utility from the next hub or the next 1,000 devices. That certainly has not been the case in Amsterdam yet, and so I think to a certain extent we need to be careful to not force every decision to be data made because we have data in front of us, and so I think that there's an opportunity for the city, if I can pontificate for a second, there's an opportunity for the city to kind of keep going until the data sends up the warning signs, rather than looking to the data for permission kind of constantly.
And it's also a thing that the city needs to learn to deal with the data and what to do with the data and to implement the data or make policy out of the data. And I think that process is starting now.
Hello, I'm Carsten from Impact. I just joined the team last week, so I'm using the opportunity to learn a bit more about my own colleagues' work. So I have a question for Chella. I was wondering if you could maybe explain a bit more in which way you are working with, and if you are working with operators and the mass providers. And I'm wondering especially about whether operators might sometimes be a bit wary of joining such a platform because it might endanger their business models or something like that, or do you have the impression that they lose control over their own service? So maybe you can explain a bit more how you work with them and how you try to actually get them to motivate them to participate in such a platform and to actually implement the API on their side.
Okay, thanks for your question. First off, The TOMP working group, so the group that are developing the API, the standard, is an open working group. So it's open for everybody to join. So this standard has been developed by a mix of mass providers, operators, policymakers. They're all involved in creating the standard and getting it out there. So from that point, a lot of them are already involved. Next level, what you're saying about when I share data, where does it happen, is also linked to what is happening in CDSM. I heard you say things like, you're looking into getting the clicks from the app, which is essentially the core business data of a provider, and getting them to share that is a big step. But in that and in your mobility data, it's important to see that if you want to move forward as a whole and make mass happen, you need to share and you need to open things up. Otherwise, you will just come to a standpoint and nothing will happen. And as a TOMP working group, we are promoting this, we're talking about this, we're offering it, but we are a group of people doing this almost without any funds. There are some project funds and some private funds from companies in there. So there is no marketing plan. There is no thing behind it other than our own trying to get it out there as much as possible. It's not a commercial product as well. It's free to use for everybody. It's free to adapt. It's free for input. So you can go online and in the GitHub, you can ask your questions and your questions will be answered. And if possible, they will be changed as well. And we hope by this approach, and also working together with governments, because you're talking about Hammer, it's the government, it's the policymakers that can make this happen over time. Because businesses will only make choices, in my experience with this, when it's unavoidable in a way. Some are front runners. It's like in life, when you're talking about adoption of shared mobility, you have the early adapters, you have the middle, and you have the late adapters. And in this technology, it's the same. You have some who are like, oh, this is amazing, we want to go for it. Some who are a bit hesitant, and a lot of them who just wait until it's completely ready. And that is something we have to go through with this as well. Hope this answers your question.
Is it okay if I ask another? Okay. From me? Also a question to Charlie, also a bit technical. So with integration of different platforms, as I understand, you also integrate with payments with their own. So each platform, each provider has its own payment system. Mm-hmm. So this becomes very complicated, and especially when you know your customer and you have the authentication on top of it. Yeah. And then when you we'll take it into the context of if you want to, for example, introduce discounts or subscriptions from the city or people on welfare. Like, what's the challenge of, let's say, creating this, applying this API or applying the system to actually a kind of overarching payment system that would allow you, like over a chip card, that would allow you to subsidize perhaps different trips?
The approach we take at this point is payment can be handled in a lot of different ways, because we want to cover as much as possible. And payment is something, as I said also in my presentation, we are offering a few solutions for. You can do it like this, but then we also leave it open because it's very dependent on what we want to achieve. But if you look how we want to solve this in the future, like how it's by creating, you need to know who a person is and who they are outside of being a customer or not. So you need a connection to actually say, okay, this is like a user service provider in some way where you know this person is this person, has a driver's license, has all these things, but also you can build to them. Then you can go directly, and then you have a clear understanding. The way it's now, it's more each connection needs some kind of contract. You cannot do this completely fully automatically yet, because you don't have this link in between, this like ecosystem of trust that was also in the slide. You need to trust each other, and you need to find a way. And the only way to do this at this point in time is through contracts, through negotiations, through personal connections between the different providers. Hope this answers a bit. It's not technical, but it's something that's in progress.
Not sure. Do we have time for a last question? No? Okay, sorry. Okay, so thank you for this very interesting discussion. around data standardization. I would like really to thank our three speakers today. So Chalchema and Alex. I will make it. And thank you all for attending this session. I hope it was as inspiring as it was for me. So thank you. We can applaud them one more time. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.